review of the annual town meeting warrant meeting to order. Let me say before we get started, the intent here is a very simple one, and that is try to reduce the size of the warrant that we'll have to deal with at our postponed annual town meeting in September to just those articles that are essential for the functioning of the town. And I think it's important to note, as I did last night at the select board meeting, that suggesting that an article is not essential has got nothing to do with our particular views about whether the article ought to be adopted or not. The postponement of those articles are just in the interest of the public health and trying to make sure we don't add to the spread of this virus. So I had distributed a list of warrant articles to you folks, and they were broken down by first having the proposed consent calendar that the town moderator had sent me. And then the second was the disposition of select board articles. We had not last Monday, but a week ago, we had talked about all of those articles. And I will say that in Article 29, I was asked to find out if there was any, what the school's position on that would be. And the school committees were both fairly sure that that should be an essential item, that we were going to eventually get to the middle school building project and that we might as well get on with putting some money aside. So I said without objection last night at the select board meeting that we would change, we would cross out the word check with schools on that list and deem that to be essential. The next article below that, Article 40, I was asked to find out additional information about. That's the fossil fuel article. And I did find out that they had amended their article to include only new construction. And I was also asked to find out if the Attorney General had made a judgment yet on the Brookline matter, and they had not. So I don't know exactly what the disposition of that article would be. The next category is the disposition of the planning board articles. This is the list that was sent to me by Matt. I know he's on the call with us this morning. And just in case some of you might not have heard this, you'll see the word in there in that list, in addition to essential and consent calendar, that you see the word recall, because it turns out that if a warrant article is postponed or not moved at an annual town meeting, that's the equivalent of a no vote on the article. And it turns out that if there is a no vote on a planning board or zoning board article, it cannot come back to town meeting for 2 years. And so instead of, if we decide that one of these articles is not essential, and you'll see that that was the recommendation of the planning board for Article 33, rather than not move it, we would simply recall, which is to refer the article back to the planning board for additional consideration. And then the next is a disposition of citizen.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second, Mike, on those two items?
Sure.
It feels to me as though we run a very big risk of putting it on the consent calendar, of that item either being moved off the consent calendar for the purposes of discussion, and then you can't recall it. Now it's on the consent calendar. You're all in for it. You've got to move forward with, getting it done. So it's not like it's on the consent calendar. And if somebody wants to move it off the consent calendar, they move to. It's got to be. I don't know. Can we have it on the consent calendar in a way that people can say, let's move it to the recall list? Or I'm not quite clear on.
We do have
the annotation there.
We do have the moderator join us, but I would suspect it works like this, and she can chime in. If, let's say, Article 435, the Hammerhead Lot 1, that there's a number of people who objected at being on the consent calendar. It would come off the consent calendar, and then it would be dealt with in its regular order.
Right.
And when we get to it in its regular order, I suspect there can be a motion to recall the article and refer it back to the planning board, but I'll ask the moderator.
Okay. All right. So
Well,
we could
let's-
even if it comes for regular order, we could abbreviate it and just move to recall it or something like that.
Oh, I want to see what the moderator has to say about that.
Okay.
You're muted, Carmen.
Unmuted, yes, I agree.
Okay. All right, then the next was citizen petition articles. The moderator has been in touch with all of the petitioners, I think, except that petitioner for Article 48. I don't know if you've subsequently reached him, but you can see what the disposition, or at least the intent is of the citizens who are going to have those articles. That doesn't mean that we can't, meaning the Finance Committee and the Select Board can't recommend that an article be postponed anyway. But that's where things stand there. And then the last other disposition, these are essentially the capital and budget projects with respect to the town meeting, with the exception of the personal bylaw amendment, which I haven't heard, and Article 9, the budget adjustment article, which will not be moved because it was dealt with a end of year transfer by the Select Board and the Finance Committee. So it is the moderator's judgment as to what goes on the consent calendar, but I suspect she would appreciate hearing if any of us have concerns about any of the articles she has placed on that calendar. So why don't we begin then? And I guess before doing that, I should state for the record that this is a preliminary meeting. And once we have concluded our work, I will schedule a full meeting of the Finance Committee and the Select Board where we will review what comes out of this meeting and then make a final recommendation. So, Matt.
It's actually the opposite of a concern, but for Article 37 that we do want to move, I wondered whether there was the possibility of adding it to the consent calendar. However, the difference would be if someone asked to pull it off with the consent calendar, we would not recall it. We would proceed with deliberation and vote.
Okay, well, why don't we?
Because it's non-controversial that we did not hear, we heard many comments related to the related project at Starbucks that would proceed after this was approved, but nothing really related to the boundary resetting in our public hearing.
Well, I don't.
If I might, I do recall there being one a butter, not to the Starbucks property, but to the house that's immediately adjacent to the Starbucks property, and that would be the property that would be rezoned. Who was
that house is owned by the Starbucks owner.
Yes, the one immediately next door is owned by the Starbucks owner, and the next house over,
The one beyond, yeah.
Yes, was concerned about the creep of the commercial district toward the residential district. So I had actually intended to reach out to that person, but have not gotten around to doing that. But I think that it would be in the ordinary course, but for that, a butter's concern about the principle of the creep of the commercial district toward the residential district, I would say absolutely, let's put this article on the consent calendar. But I think, the one concern that I have about putting it on the consent calendar this time around is that I would like to increase the number of people who will be required, the number of voters who will be required to pull an item off the consent calendar to 10 instead of 5. And the reason for that is just to have a little bit more weight behind the judgment that it is more important to fully deliberate the particular article than it is to streamline and get us out of there quickly because of the COVID risk. So just a little bit more weight behind that decision. But that does put in a butter who's, you know, a handful of people. There may not be even 5 of them who have a concern about it. So I was just a little bit concerned about that, but I think we're probably okay putting that on the consent calendar, and I will put back to the top of my list reaching out to that voter.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to move fairly systematically on this. So rather than reach a judgment about any other particular article going on this consent calendar, let's start with a review of the moderator's proposed consent calendar and see if there are any articles on that the group suggests that doesn't belong there. Mary?
I'm wondering if Article 44, the Community Preservation Committee's appropriation, should be moved off of the consent calendar. The Finance Committee voted to recommend affirmative action. However, I know that there's controversy around the money that's being appropriated to both of the churches in town, and also some of the money being appropriated for recreational projects. So I'm wondering if that should be taken off.
May I suggest that we have, some towns treat their CPA projects as individual articles rather than combining all the projects under a single article. And we certainly have in the past split out certain projects for separate motion. To divide the motion. And so we could do that. The CPA article is typically one that takes us a lot of time because there are a lot of projects. A lot of that time is in presentation. And if we elect not to have presentations at the meeting, that will certainly shorten things up. But if we do have presentations, that particular article tends to take us a lot of time just because it's a pretty good laundry list of things that people need to hear about and maybe want to talk about. One possibility, so anything that goes on the consent calendar, if the CPA article goes on the consent calendar, individual projects could be pulled off without the whole thing being pulled off. But I would also say that if the consensus is that the public is going to really want to talk about 2 or 3 of the projects, then we certainly could split that vote and take those 2 or 3 and move them in the ordinary course and put the rest of the projects on the consent calendar. That would be another option. So if we want to think about going in that direction, I'd be very interested to hear from folks which particular projects, even within the Finance Committee, which particular projects merit perhaps more discussion. And that we could certainly pull those off.
We had extensive conversations, Carmen, regarding the 2 that Mary mentions, which is the clock on the UU Church and the roof on the parish hall for the Catholic Church. So we had extensive help from town council to describe the various rulings that have occurred. It needs to be aired, I think. I think it will probably end up passing because, the challenges at Acton and Supreme Court rulings recently, but the town needs to be apprised of some of that before they can make up their mind, I think, because it will engender conversation. Those 2.
So Carmen, I want to ask, so make sure I heard you correctly. So if it stays on the consent calendar and 10 people object, they can object to a particular funding proposal as opposed to the entire CPC appropriation?
Well, yes, I would give people that option to pull off individual projects rather than pulling off the entire CPC article. But if, as Dean suggests, we take those 2 articles, Mary also mentioned maybe some of the recreational expenditures might be things that people would want to discuss. We could take a 3rd or a 4th project off and say, these we're going to have full deliberation on, the rest of them are going on the consent calendar. And we certainly can split that vote if we wish to.
Stephen, did I see?
Yeah, as Carmen mentioned, other communities have done this. I know in Westford, they did put the CPC articles on consent, and I think maybe 2 projects were pulled up. I mean, there was a generalized debate about whether or not what CPC is for, but I think 2 projects were pulled off, and then the remaining handful were done as a part of consent. So it did shorten that aspect of it. So I think and that seemed to work, because not every CPC project is going to generate discussion. So I would support that approach.
Linda? You're muted.
You're muted.
Carmen, I know that you're planning on presentations for all of the articles, if I understood correctly, prior to that would be recorded. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, we had the discussion at the select board meeting last night that we would have a second round of hearings, and there would be presentations on all of the articles. Now, a decision, I suppose that those hearings ought to cover all of the articles, regardless of what our plan is for those articles at the meeting, because it is still open to the meeting to change what the plan is for any individual article. So probably best advised to have presentations on all of them. So yes, Linda, regardless of what we would plan for the CPC articles, some on the consent, some off, we would have presentations on all of them at a hearing before the meeting.
So the reason I was asking to revisit that is I'm wondering if that in some ways addresses some of the concerns we have about the 2 and maybe 3 articles or 3 recommendations within the CPC. Could, whether some of that could be aired vis-a-vis the new hearing on this matter, so that it would still allow us to keep this as an integrated whole on the consent calendar initially.
I think that's a good idea. I think it should be, for this purpose, it could be left on the consent calendar, and with some additional explanation, as Dean indicated, was provided to the Finance Committee. Maybe we can air these concerns in a satisfactory way, and then you could make a judgment after the second round of public hearings, Carmen, as to whether or not, yes, there still remains controversy about Article 1, 2, and 3, and you're going to pull them off the consent calendar. But I think for now we should leave them on. And in fact, that's the way we should err for all of these. If we think we can keep it on the consent calendar, that's going to really help us in terms of the ability to get through this town meeting efficiently.
So I have a suggestion here. Perhaps the moderator could put 2 specific, like 44A and 44B split, and put those 2 things on the consent calendar. And then if somebody wants to talk about the line items, which are in 44A, which are the ones we already know have some level of controversy or some level of deliberation required, somebody could pull those off and the others just slide through. Otherwise, unless I'm missing something, this is a single article with language, and it would need to be pulled off and amended. That's the process. It's not like we get to just pick and choose words off of an article and talk about those. So it feels like maybe the moderator could split and create an A and B version, and then maybe people have to slide A off the consent. I also don't think that you can give elaborate conversations about anything and then just leave it on the consent calendar, because that basically allows us to advocate for something and then shut off debate. I don't think that's good either. So those are my 2 comments on how we get to this done.
Yeah, if I might, We already have a natural division of Article 44 because each of the projects has a letter subdivision under the article.
Yep.
That enables us to split this article for different treatment in terms of the vote. With respect to, and so one way that I could handle this, Dean, if the whole article were on the consent calendar, as you know, what I customarily do with the consent calendar is I have a PowerPoint. This year there'll be no PowerPoint, but I'll read through each article and pause to see if there are 10 voters who would like to remove
Right.
the article from the consent calendar. So when I get to Article 44, I'm going to go through A, B, C, D, etc., and allow
Okay.
everybody a chance with respect to each letter whether they wish to pull off that project. And then on your second point about advocacy without the opportunity for citizen comment, question, or deliberation, it's anticipated that the second round of hearings would be widely publicized, would be on Zoom, would be open meetings, and would provide an opportunity for all citizens to weigh in with questions and comments through the webinar ability that we have.
No, I understand that, Carmen. My point was, I don't think we can provide any kind of like verbiage around a specific article and then say, no, that stays on the, we're doing this because X, Y, Z. We know there's some of this. Now we're not talking about that anymore. I just don't think we have the opportunity to do that at the town meeting. I'm sure I understand we're going to have some conversation around it at hearings, but I just think that any language that's put out on the floor has to then give the opportunity for counterpoint to be offered. So that we just have to just move in a very strict way through the consent items, in a neutral manner. These are on the list. Do you want it off or not? And not advocate or otherwise, try to.
Who's proposing advocating? I don't quite understand.
Well, okay, all right. I'll stand down. That's fine.
Well, it's not bad. It's on the consent calendar. It's on the consent calendar, and it's not. And then the process is the moderator will read each article, and if someone objects, off
That's
it
fine.
comes.
The way the conversation had gone, it seemed as though we'd want to give a little bit of maybe the legal context or some kind of, descriptive or something about that one as we move past it in order to try to keep it on. And I just didn't think that gave anybody an opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute. So, yeah.
Right. I think that was anticipated at the hearings.
Okay, all right. That's fine.
So, all right, so the Community Preservation Act, so the way it sounds like it stands is with Carmen's ability to reserve judgment until after the rescheduled public hearings, it would stay on there and would be listed as two separate components of an article. And so
actually, I thought I was understanding that the whole article would just go on there, and then voters would have the opportunity, project by project, to pull anything off if they wish.
Okay, Mary.
No, I thought actually we were going to see what happened at the hearing, and then it was going to be, Carmen, your call as to whether you wanted to split it out.
Right. But we have a timing problem, as we always do with the consent calendar, because we like to publish it in advance of the meeting, which means we have to put it in stone, or at least we have to put it, we have a draft of it out there so that people know what the plan is. And as you know, we often have a change or two in the consent calendar by the time we get to the meeting, pulling something off or never adding anything, but often putting something off or changing a motion.
Okay.
Are there concerns about any of the other articles on the proposed consent calendar? Linda?
So article number 12, haven't we amended that already for a different amount for Rizzo? For the Regional Housing Service Office?
I think so, but however it is the way it would, I'm not sure. I'm looking at my notes.
So I think the article is well, we can change the motion. That's correct. We can
Mhm.
change the motion. Okay.
The motion could be different than what's in the warrant as long as the moderator agrees.
Yeah, I just didn't want to lose, I didn't want to lose that amendment.
Yeah, I don't think that's an issue. So other,
I think, sorry, just to go, if the change is not, and I don't think that the budget change to Regional Housing Services Office is what I would call material in the context of the article. And because every warrant article says, or take any other action relative there too, I guess I'm stepping on the moderator's toes here, but I believe that you could put this on the consent calendar and a non-material adjustment to the amount would be captured, but that would be
because
my
there's
take on
going
it.
to be, Stephen, we talked before, Carmen has proposed there will be some kind of a handout, excuse me, at town meeting that will essentially be the motions that are going to be made. So I'm pretty sure you're correct that we can simply get the correct amount in there and have it be as printed in the handout. Any other concerns about articles on the proposed consent calendar? Seeing none, then let's move to the select board articles. We had 3 additional articles from the ones that the select board is sponsoring that we believe could go to the consent calendar. The first is the Affordable Housing Trust bylaw. This is setting up a trust committee to manage affordable housing funds if and when we ever get good news out of the state legislature. Funding for affordable housing, that's the $500 to $1,000 use of free cash. And third is the Article 50, the additional liquor licenses. So let me ask the question there. Is there any concern that any of you have about moving Article 13, 14, and 50 to the consent calendar? Mary?
Yes, at our last Finance Committee meeting, I think the feeling of the Finance Committee is Article 14, the use of free cash. I think there was a hesitation there on the part of the Finance Committee until we learned what spending was going to be for the operating budgets this year before we would wholeheartedly support this. So I would say this should come off of the consent calendar until we know more about how the other budgets are shaping up.
Other comments about that?
I think to just sort of add to Mary's point, once we get through our conversations, which include the new operating budgets for the schools and the town, I think it's likely that we would come back around to this and likely say, yeah, it's okay. Let's keep our pedal to the metal regarding affordable housing. So putting it on the consent calendar that Carmen publishes is one thing, but after we get through our reevaluation of those operating budgets, if we find that we just don't think we have the funds for it, and the Finance Committee votes, we recommend no action, maybe Carmen could take it off the consent calendar. Like when she moves the consent calendar, she just moves it without that item. I mean, I'm sort of sensitive to her need to put something there to get it teed up. Because I do think that there's some general sentiment in favor of this, but there is a lot of hesitancy because we're so at sea regarding how the state budgets are going to be set, how that's going to have knock-on effects on our local budgets. So there is some concern that we were unable to move ahead with our basic recommendation of affirmative or no action. That's where we are right now.
Well, okay. I think if, Carmen, you can either tell me I'm nuts or confirm. I think once we publish a consent calendar, getting something on it is trickier than getting something off it.
Yes.
So I think the idea of keeping it on the consent calendar, and then if it turns out the budgets don't materialize in a way that could allow us to support this, it would just come off the consent calendar. But if it turns out the budgets seem to be okay and we would be supportive of this. I think once she's published her consent calendar, we can't go, hold it, we want a couple more things put on there. Is that reasonable interpretation, Carmen?
It is, Mike, and the issue for me is notice. I think it is important for citizens to have as much advance notice of what we're planning to just sail through, so that if there are people who are concerned about that, they can come prepared to remove something from the consent calendar. If they don't know that something is going to get popped on there, that's much more problematic for people in terms of notice.
Stephen, did I say?
Yeah, just so in terms of timing on articles like this, one of the things that Carrie LaFleur and I, along with Dr. Hunter, have talked about is in terms of timing. Right now, we're targeting kind of the end of July to prepare an updated budget because the community is going to need time to, see what's in it, and we're going to need time to, highlight what changes have been made and why. That's not to say that we think we'll have the governor's budget or the state's budget numbers by then, but we just feel like that's kind of the latest we could push it. So we'll know then, at least a month in advance of town meeting, where we think things are. And I think we would probably make recommendations to all of you on whether or not we think articles like Article 14 should remain on the consent agenda or on the warrant, or if any action should be taken on them at all. So I agree. I think it's assume that things will be status quo and leave it on there. And then if we need to take it off because of our budget assumptions, we can certainly do that.
All right.
This feels to me like an item that is very similar to am I still up? Am I off mute? Yeah. This feels to me very similar to the ones that the planning board suggested. It's either on the consent calendar or we defer it completely, is the way that I feel as though this is going to end up being. So that's the way
And that is an option. If something is removed from the consent calendar, there can also be no motion under the article. So it isn't, we have additional options beyond fully debating the article.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So is there any other further comment on the 3 articles from the select board's list to go to this consent calendar? Right, seeing none. Let's move down to the planning board articles and deal with.
Mike, can I interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
I'm wondering if at this point it would be good to look at the articles and see if any we think should be moved to the consent calendar.
Good idea. All right, let's stay with the select board articles, and I suspect you must have one there, Matt.
I do. I'm looking at Article 29, which was sponsored by the select board, but really was the origin of this was a memo from the finance committee for the middle school stabilization fund. And as you know, the school committee last week, I think, gave their support to this. So I'm wondering if we should put this on the consent calendar, because we know we're going to have a middle school eventually, and we have the free cash. So that's why I'm thinking we could move it to the consent calendar.
Well, I find it a little ironic that a $2 million expenditure should go to the consent calendar on a $500.
Well, we talked about that at the finance committee, where we recommended affirmative action on this item. And that is that we're actually not spending anything. We're just earmarking and encumbering funds that are still on account. So,
it's
it's
the affordable housing free cash article. It's exactly the same or not.
Well, the article for affordable housing is money that will go to project needs, to be spent on project needs. The money that will be earmarked for the school will be to reduce taxes. So we see that as fundamentally different reasons for earmarking funds. So,
All right, what are some other thoughts about the middle school stabilization going to the consent calendar? Matt?
I just thought that some legislative bodies have a rubric for these consent calendar articles. And if you have expenditures, appropriations that, you know, are not routine and they're above a certain threshold, they must come to a vote. You just can't put these kinds of things. If you're spending other people's money beyond a certain threshold, it must come to a vote. And so I wish we would set a rubric like this that state legislatures often have.
If I might address that, this is an unusual year, Matt. We do have a rubric, or at least we've had a tradition with respect to how moderators, myself and my predecessors, have handled the consent calendar, and that is we put routine and non-controversial items, things that are of a housekeeping matter, on the consent calendar. And in a normal year, I would say that this would not be an item we would put on the consent calendar. There will be a vote. Of course, there will be a vote, and citizens do have the option to pull any 10 people who are at the meeting will have the option to pull it off because they want to talk about it. And really, this is a streamlining effort, and I have stressed to people that this is an unusual year. We're going to have some deviations in our traditions, and we fully plan to go right back to what our traditions have always been in future years as soon as we're past this. So I'm not troubled by pushing the envelope a little bit on what we put on the consent calendar this year, because there is a safety valve to take things off, and because we're being very clear that this is an unusual year and there are things that are not routine or necessarily entirely non-controversial that are on the consent calendar, but people can make use of that safety valve if they would like.
Right. So,
But your point's well taken, Matt.
Susan?
My concern is that if there ends up being 4, 5, 6 articles on this consent calendar that citizens want to pull off, does it question the contents as a whole of the consent calendar? I mean, does it raise any issues if there are a number of articles on the consent calendar that get pulled off? And I agree that this is a one-time, the $2 million for the stabilization fund. I think we've all vetted it, but I think that citizens seeing a $2 million article in the consent calendar that has not been routine, or even though this is an unusual year, you know, it would cause concern, I think, if I was a voter. I would rather see it stand alone.
Stephen?
I kind of agree with that. It is a big number, but I think Dean, you said it. These free cash articles, they're either going to make financial sense or they're not. And so they're either like they could easily go on the consent calendar or not be moved at all. And I don't think there really is there'll be a middle option. And depending on what we decide for our budget assumptions, we may say we should not be spending free cash in clumps like this. We should hold on to it to make sure that we can meet operational needs, or we just don't know yet. But I think in a normal year, I do think that this potentially would be a consent calendar thing, because I think people realize that on its face, it makes fiscal sense to do this. So I don't really feel strongly one way or the other, but I do think with the free cash articles, it will be kind of waved through or not moved at all because because it's either going to make sense or it won't.
All right. So I'm going to ask Dean, Linda, and Mary on or off.
I'm sorry, Mike, say that again.
I'm going to ask you, Linda, Dean, and myself to just say whether you prefer this to be on or off the consent calendar. Recall, this is a preliminary hearing. We're going to have a full discussion of this with the Finance Committee and the Select Board. So Mary, what's your position?
I would like it to be on.
Linda?
I'd like it to be on the consent calendar.
Dean?
I'd like it to be on.
Right, then we're going to move that to the consent calendar. And we will pick the same debate up with the larger group when we get to it. Are there any other articles on the select board's list that people want to talk about? Okay, so let's move to the planning board articles. There are Article 35 and Article 36, which are either on the consent calendar or would be recalled. So let's ask what people's preferences are for those two articles. I personally would like to see them go to the consent calendar, but I don't.
I'm sorry, which ones, Mike?
This is Article 35, the Hammerhead Lot, and Article 36, criteria for parking relief.
I would defer to the wisdom of the planning board on these. So I'll, let's put them on the consent calendar from my perspective, but that's not because I'm evaluating the.
The recommendation was to put them on the consent calendar, and if that isn't something we can agree to, then we would recall them or refer them back to the planning board. So Linda, where are you on these two articles?
I concur with that.
Mary?
Yes, me too. Consent calendar is fine.
So just to reiterate, just so that I'm clear, if they're on the consent calendar and they get pulled off, can a motion on the floor be made to recall them? And I believe Carmen said yes, so that we don't sacrifice 2 years on this. That's the only concern I have. But
Right.
I think that Carmen said that we could have a motion on the floor once it comes, if it had to come off, we could have a motion on the floor to recall it.
Yes, that's certainly possible, and someone just needs to be prepared to be making that motion when it comes up.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. And
Then I'm all in with put them on the consent calendar.
okay, so we will move Article 35 and Article 36 to the consent calendar. Going down to the disposition of citizen articles, are there any articles there that we believe should be on the consent calendar?
Before we leave this grouping, can we just get a little bit of commentary from Matt regarding the essential need for the accessory dwelling? I just feel like we could get into a morass of conversation about that if we're not careful. So it could be a time sink for the meeting. That's the only reason I'm even bringing this up. I think it's important that the town do this, but in the interests of, the efficiency of the meeting, maybe we could defer it. That's my only question.
Well, I'm going to ask Dean that we finish our work on the consent calendar.
Okay, so I'm
and
sorry.
we'll come back
I'm sorry,
to
we can do
the
that. That's
essential
fine.
articles and period.
Yep.
All right, so is there any thought of any of the articles, citizen petition articles that should be put on the consent calendar?
Mike,
And-
do we have any new information on those that are marked either pending or postponed?
Well, Article 41, the citizen who was going to move that agreed to postpone that particular article.
Okay.
And
Right,
then,
and that again needs to be a motion. That's a zoning bylaw, I think, technically, so it may need to be referred to the planning board. I know that's an odd thing to do with a citizen petition, but.
okay, so that, when we get to that, we'll suggest that we change from postpone to recall.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the 1-year moratorium on PRDs, I think that.
Oh, I'm sorry, that is what I was talking about. The 1-year moratorium on PRDs is the one that needs to be recalled.
So that would, and pending means that, as I understood it, the petitioner would have been willing to postpone it if certain planning board articles were postponed, right? Am I correct on remembering that, Carmen?
That would be Article 41 and 42. There would have been a much greater willingness to hold off on those articles until whatever time the planning board was going to bring forward the PRD article. But there was strong feeling by the citizens there that it makes a whole lot of sense for voters to consider these articles together, which is not to say that their articles don't have force on their own, even without any changes in the PRD law. But if you are going to change it, they had these additional changes that they thought should be part of it. They point out also that there was a lot of support for their idea at the hearings.
Okay. And the HDC nominating organizations, you still haven't been able to be in touch with?
I have been in touch with that petitioner who was wanting to see what happened at this past HDC hearing before he made his decision about what to do with that article. And I've not heard from him since that hearing. I will reach out to him again.
All right, and let's move on then to the other articles under other disposition. Is there any article there that we think we put on the consent calendar?
For citizens petitions, Mike?
No, I'm sorry, Stephen. We're moving down to what are called, other disposition, essentially the budget, capital budget articles. All right. So we have our adjusted consent calendar. In addition to those that were on the original one proposed by the moderator, we'll add Article 13, Article 14, Article 15, excuse me, Article 50, and Article 35 and 36. We will at least.
And Article 29.
And, yes, I'm sorry, I missed that in pencil. Yes, thank you. And that's not definitive yet, because again, we're going to take this before the full Finance Committee and the Select Board. And I will revise this list that I submitted to all of you based on our judgments today and distribute it to the Finance Committee and the Select Board. And then Dean, you and I can get together and find out when we want to try to do this.
Right.
All right. So next, I think we would come back and deal with those articles that we believe to be essential. And so that would begin with the Select Board articles. And the only one that is viewed as essential there is the tax increment financing article. It's very time sensitive. So again, not a judgment as to whether or not anybody supports this article, only a judgment that it is essential that the town take it up and deal with it. Barry.
Mike, I have a question about the procedure. So if an article is not on the consent calendar, but we consider it time sensitive and essential, what will be the process at town meeting? I know we're not having presentations, so does that just mean that it will be open up for discussion? Or what?
Okay, so first I don't know exactly the order, and perhaps the moderator can comment, but there will be a consent calendar motion. So all of the ones that and then we'll deal with that.
Right.
And then there will be a motion, I suspect made maybe jointly by the Finance Committee and the Select Board. I don't exactly know how Carmen wants to proceed. There will be a motion to postpone indefinitely a set of articles. We haven't gotten to them yet. And it'll be dealt with, yes or no. And then once we've done those two acts, we will go through the warrant in the order in which it is presented and deal with each article. Do I have it right, Carmen?
You do. The only thing I would add, Mike, is that depending on how many articles we have that we are considering postponing versus, and I'll separate out the planning board, the zoning articles, which need to have different language in the motion with respect to them. We could end up with a situation where it just makes a lot more sense to deal with each article when we get to it. And the motion that would be there on that article is a motion to postpone indefinitely, and we open the floor for discussion and we have a vote. The and the concern I have is that if you have a smaller number in an omnibus motion, we could end up using up a lot of time in the mechanics of deciding what to keep on it and what to pull off, rather than just deciding we're all okay postponing it. And that'll just be kind of a judgment call when we see how many articles we would want to treat that way. I certainly think that the zoning articles that are going to be recalled, referred back to the planning board, we would put them together under a single motion. But the others, it's just a little more cumbersome in terms of the procedure to bunch a lot of things, and it may be more efficient to deal with them individually.
I mean, if you bunch, I understand, but if you bunch them all, let's say we have 7 that we agree can be postponed. Would the procedure be similar to the way you would deal with a consent calendar?
Yes.
And that is, if 10 citizens object to Article 7 being postponed, off it comes?
Yes.
So it's not a debate. It's just an objection that's noted and removes an article.
Yes. And incidentally, not to say that the same motion couldn't be made when we take up that article in general deliberation, because removing something from an omnibus motion is not the same as voting it down. So when that article comes up, it could be moved again to be postponed, and there could be, you might have 10 people that want to take something out of an omnibus motion to postpone, but the meeting might nonetheless be in favor of postponing it. So you can still take up that question when you get to it if you don't want to, if there are 10 people who don't want to consider them all together.
But the primary motion, if something like that happened, would be the traditional yes or no on the motion.
Yes.
Somebody would have to offer an amendment.
Yes, although, the way we handle the consent calendar is we have a motion which is typically made by the chair of the finance committee. For some reason, we do it under Article 2 here, reports. That's never made a lot of sense to me, but that's where we do it. And then we allow people to pull things out of it, which is in essence an amendment to that motion. But so we handle the procedure a little differently. We don't require a vote of the whole meeting to amend, but it changes what that motion is by pulling a particular article out. And we would, I've discussed this with town council, and he's totally comfortable with us handling an omnibus motion to postpone in exactly the same way we do the consent calendar.
Okay.
So that would also occur under the here reports, like right at the top of the meeting, Carmen?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So
Thank you.
if we go back to the question of essential, the first article is Article 16. That's the tax incremental financing. Is there anybody who does not believe that's essential? Okay.
I do think that it's essential, but I'd like a little bit of clarity on this. My understanding is that they have received their tax credits.
Yes.
So they are now in a position to start to move, and they need to be assured of this in order to move.
All right.
Would their tax credits evaporate if we postpone this? This is going to be worth a lot of time for the meeting to get to the bottom of this. I think Susan had mentioned at the one meeting back that she thought that there was a possible amendment that is being considered to shorten up the time window for the tax relief, et cetera. This is going to take the meeting some time to get through. So if we were to defer it to a special town meeting or some indefinite point in the future, would their thing completely collapse, or would they be able to, just as they've been waiting for their funding to come in, they can wait for our tax relief to come in?
I had one conversation with Walter Ohanian quite a while ago when they received their, I think it was $7.6 million gross in tax credits, which would net them about 6.3. He said it needed to be done as soon as possible. The problem that I think we all face in this is that while we have a scheduled date for annual town meeting on September 13th, we don't know when the postponed annual town meeting is going to be. So what we can't say is we can't say we're going to take it up in December or January or whatever it is. And I think that leaves him in limbo. But I can certainly cycle back with him and get more clarity on that. And also, of course, these new set of public hearings that we're going to have will allow us to get sort of up to date on exactly what the finances are on this project and his timeline. So, but even though you're right, Dean, I think it's going to take some time, at least from the latest from him, and I'll cycle back. It would be essential that the town deal with this. So we can put it on the essential list for now, and then between now and when the Finance Committee and the Select Board meet again, I'll cycle back with Walter and get a little bit more clarity on the timeline he's facing. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, that I think it seems reasonable. I mean, I don't think we're promoting the fact that, you know, that one way or the other, that we want the town meeting to be the arbiter of this, but it just is, it's a bad time. It's a bad time to try to get through this discussion, that's all.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
you know.
All right, so I'll follow up with Walter and then be prepared to provide information when the two full committees get together. The next item is item 32. That's the accessory dwelling article. Is there any objection to that being deemed an essential article? Seeing none. Then the Thoreau Depot property. We had some issue about that early on. It was a question about whether it could go to the consent calendar. And Carmen, I think you raised some reservations on that. So where is the group here? Linda, what's your thinking?
I think Carmen was going to reach out to a landowner on that, and maybe we can get it on the consent calendar was the point.
All right, so we'll just put a hold on that until Carmen has the ability to speak to the abutter, essentially. All right. Then we move down to the titled Other Disposition, and that's Article 10, 11, 25, 26, 27, and 28. I don't see how we can avoid calling those essential, but I'm happy to.
So Mike, this is Cynthia.
Yes, Cynthia.
Article 28 will not be moved.
All right.
That's
No
the
more.
capital, that's a CCHS capital, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's the driveway.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the school committee has not yet deemed the Concord school capital article as essential.
When are you going to deal with that, Cynthia?
I guess it would be our next meeting on the 13th.
Cynthia, isn't there some sense that some pieces of that, I know that they're talking about the big pieces of it, not necessarily being essential, the big energy units, but I thought there were some other elements like some set asides to keep Peabody and Sanborn, you know, safe, you know, kind of thing.
Yes, that would make sense. We just never came to that conclusion formally.
All right, so you'll take that up on the 13th then?
Yes. And,
Okay. And is
and
that,
obviously our budget articles are essential.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
all right, so we'll put a hold on
Article 26 is a hold,
26.
and
I'm
28
gonna step away for 2 seconds, but I'll be right back. Hold on.
and Article 28.
My power supply is running out.
So 28, there'll be no motion expected on that. And 26, we will not make a judgment on it. Well, I think we still can make a judgment on it. We should call it essential. And then if Cynthia gets back to us, it simply won't be moved. Is that the point, Cynthia?
It could be moved or amended down, I would think,
But
potentially.
even if it was amended, you'd still want it dealt with at
Correct.
town meeting.
Yep.
Okay, so I think it's fair that we can call it essentially note that it may be amended.
That sounds like that's reasonable, yes.
Is there any objection to that approach? Dean, while we are gone, we agreed, no motion on 28, and we will call 26 essential, but note that it may be amended.
I have a question. For Article 26, the determination here is how much of this is time sensitive? Is that what, not whether we should do this or not, but how much? Okay, I just want to.
Yep, that would be correct.
Okay,
Not a pro or con on any of these.
got it. Good.
All right, so that leaves us with Article 10, 11, 25, and 27 as essential. Is there any objection to those articles being deemed essential?
Mike, the only thing I'll say is similar to the schools, we are, as a part of our budget analysis or revision, we are looking at capital as well. And so, so Article 11, there are aspects of it that may be essential, but it may be subject to amendment as well.
Okay, I'll make note, may be amended. And these will be amendments for both the school and the town that will reduce the amount. So I think that's a legitimate, is it not, Carmen?
Definitely. Yes, no problem with that.
All right. So we will leave 10, 11, 25, 26, and 27 on the list of essential articles, together with Article 16 and Article 32 and Article 37. All right. So now we want to go back through this list and look at those articles that that could be postponed. And the first one I'll draw your attention to is, it says on your list, additional information, Article 40, that's the fossil fuel infrastructure list. And then Article 49, which the Pollinator Health Advisory Committee recommended to me that it could be postponed. So I think that one's a pretty easy call. But what do we think about the fossil fuel infrastructure bill?
I'm okay with postponing that.
Mary?
Me too.
Linda?
I'm ambivalent on this one, I have to say. So,
Well, again, I'm very much just to clarify, I'm in favor of the article, but I don't think it's essential that it be dealt with in this time frame. If we have a meeting in December or January, we can deal with it then. So,
I guess I agree with that.
all right, so we'll postpone that. Then the next set of articles are the articles that are citizen petition articles. I don't know exactly how to deal with this. Again, if my view is that for most of these, if these were not citizen petition articles, I would suggest that they be postponed. I don't see what's critical or time sensitive in them. But on the other hand, since they are citizen petition articles, I'm a little bit more sensitive to that. What the select board did do in an attempt to help, and I'm not sure if it did, was to agree that if any citizen agreed to have their article postponed, the select board would essentially sponsor the article at the next time we had a town meeting, which would relieve the petitioners from the responsibility of collecting signatures to get the article on the warrant. So.
And if I could add there, specifically, if there's a special town meeting, it's necessary to have a lot more signatures to put a citizen petition on the warrant. And the way that's been dealt with in a number of other towns has been for the select board to agree as an accommodation to the citizen petitioner to, of its own volition, place the citizen petition article on the special town meeting warrant. And that relieves the citizen petitioner of the obligation to collect the signatures to put it on the warrant. Can I just add, Mike? I know that let's see, article. These are there's no motion expected on Article 31. Does everybody know that already? That's one of the citizen petition articles. I guess that's already happening, so the petitioner doesn't see a need to do that. But Article 30 is one, that's the healthy school buses. This is one that's an appropriation article, and it takes advantage of a Volkswagen grant, which is time sensitive and makes it possible for the schools to acquire additional electric buses now. And it's, in the view of the petitioner, quite time sensitive, and therefore it should not be postponed. It would be, it would undermine the purpose of the article to postpone it. And then we've already talked about the citizen petitions that have to do with the PRDs, where those citizens feel that they're important to be taken up, along with the zoning board article that will be taken up. Let's see, 47, okay, 45, 46, and 47. The petitioner there was not prepared at the time that we communicated to say that he thought they could be postponed without harm to the points of his articles, but he reserved the right to change his mind at a future point. I do feel that we have a strong tradition of citizen petitions in our town, stronger than in most other towns, and a lot of good things get done by our citizen petitions. And I would probably put my thumb on the scale very much in favor of allowing the sponsor of a citizen petition article to make the judgment on whether the delay of the article would harm its purpose. And that's really how we're defining essential here. Can postponement happen without undermining the point of the article? So that's my point of view. That being said, it is open to anybody at the meeting to move to postpone any article which is on the warrant. It doesn't require the action of the petitioner to make that motion, and then it is up to the meeting. It is the will of the meeting what happens to that article.
Yes, but I would just say, Carmen, I agree with you, especially about the tradition of citizen petitions, but any postponed article undermines the purpose of the article. So
a matter of degree, right? Yeah.
So where are other people on this?
I don't know. I'm reluctant to have us weigh in against, so to speak, against the progress that a citizen is trying to make, and let the citizen make that decision would be my take on it.
Linda, Mary?
I agree.
Linda? You're muted again.
Yep, sorry. Oops, I agree.
You know, there's one thing that cuts towards these articles, is that most of them are at the tail end of the meeting, and so the meeting may just become exhausted, even if or it may just become impatient, and so they may move along quickly. I don't know. So if someone wants to move one, there may be, minimal deliberation on some of these. And if, and the town can move to a vote quickly just because they want to get out of there.
Stephen, was your hand?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like Carmen has, like I said, done a lot of research and talking to other moderators, and I've done similar with talking to other, town managers. And as Carmen articulated, a lot of communities did work out agreements with citizen petitioners to postpone to a date where you can have a comfortable town meeting. I mean, I'll just be blunt. I mean, if you ever sat in a football field in a folding chair for a graduation or something like that in the middle of the day, I mean, I think what's happening is that I appreciate, and maybe it's because I'm new to town, but I appreciate how the tradition of town meeting, how important that is to Concord, and I respect that very much. I came from a town that has similar reverence for town meeting, so I completely understand. But the reason why we're having these conversations is because people are going to be sitting in an uncomfortable folding chair in the middle of the day on a football field, and we're trying to still allow for debate on things that need to be debated that are essential, but also compress the amount of time people have to be sitting out there. I mean, and so I think I just want to remind folks that the reason why we're having this conversation is that if we're out there 4 hours, it's going to turn into dusk, and we're going to be, mosquitoes will descend. It could be 90 degrees. I mean, we have no idea. And so I kind of want to remind folks why we're doing all of this, because I think from a logistical standpoint, maybe that, and like I said, I went to Westford's town meeting and sat on an uncomfortable folding chair in the middle of a football field, and it got unpleasant in a hurry. And I just want to remind people that's what we're trying to contend with, and then the logistical challenges of pulling this thing off just in perfect conditions. So I'll stop.
Mike, can I want to make a comment about Article 30, and based on Stephen's telling us that we're going to want to get off those chairs pretty quickly. Article 30 is time sensitive in that we need to take advantage of the Volkswagen settlement, but only a portion of this article is for an actual bus that can take advantage of that settlement. And a much larger portion of this is not time sensitive. So I'm just saying that there might be an amendment to that. I'm just throwing that out there as something that might happen at the end of the meeting when we're all hot.
Yeah. Well, Carmen, perhaps I could ask you to revisit that issue with Brian at Mr. Fold. That's his article, I believe it is, and see if that article can in fact be amended just so we can contend with the plus funding component to it.
I will certainly have another conversation with Mr. Foltz.
Thank you.
And perhaps, well, I'm just torn. I mean, I get Stephen's point about being uncomfortable. I'm not concerned about that, but I am concerned about it, but I'm concerned about just how long we are going to be proximate to one another when we still have this virus to contend with. And for some of these articles, it's just hard to understand what is time sensitive about them.
Right.
That they need to be discussed, I agree completely. And that's why I was pleased to propose that the select board would adopt these as their articles so that they would in fact get a hearing. They're no more time sensitive than the neonicotinoid article, which we agreed to postpone. So I hope we can anyway circle back with the citizens who are proposing these to, again, encourage them to think about public safety and with the assurance that their articles will receive attention at a town meeting when we can give them the attention that they deserve. Are there any other comments about these articles? All right, so we have postponed 2 articles. Article 49, the neonicotinoid article, and we didn't postpone, but the proposer agreed to postpone Article 31, the municipal fleet electrification.
And actually, I think that one may be just a no motion expected rather than a postponement.
Oh, that's right, because that's the one that the town manager is already dealing with, correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't know that it's the town manager. I think it's the superintendent of schools.
I thought there was a town-wide a report being developed about fleet.
Oh, maybe that's right.
electrification.
Anyway, it seems to be happening, and
Got it.
therefore the citizen petitioner does not feel the need to move this article.
Okay.
For what it's worth, we have a committee of, of folks led by our sustainability coordinator who's going to be looking at that.
All right. So I think we're done. Oh, Susan.
I just had a question about what did we decide, or what did you all decide on the fossil fuel Article 40? I had written postpone down.
Me too.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're right. I just wrote it in pencil and I don't see
Okay.
it. So postpone, we've got
Yep.
40, 49, and those are the only two postponed. But then we have another category of things that will not be moved, and that is Article 31 and Article 9.
So we haven't discussed number 6 under other disposition, which you have listed as pending.
Yep, we haven't heard back from the Personnel Committee, and Carmen has not yet had a chance to reach the petitioner, or he was waiting, waiting until he attended a HDC meeting, which I think has occurred, so perhaps.
No, Matt, oh, I'm sorry, that was Dean. I was talking about Article 6, Mike. That's the personnel bylaw amendment.
Right.
Oh, I thought you said Outhouse, Mr. Outhouse was going to go to the HDC meeting before
Yes.
deciding.
But that's not for the personnel bylaw. Personnel
That's
bylaw.
48.
48, yeah.
Yeah, I
Just-
did.
I was just categorizing them as pending. So 6 is still pending, 48 is still pending.
Yes, that is still pending. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so what I will do is I will prepare a revised list, getting everything.
Before we get off of 6, thanks, Mike. Before we get off of 6, I just want to make a comment. 6 was placed on the Finance Committee hearing agenda. And we did have it. We got the presentation. But when we, as a Finance Committee, took it up as an item that we were going to make a recommendation against, we literally suggested that we make no recommendation because it didn't seem to have a financial component associated with it. So it sort of was an anomaly on our hearing agenda, and we have decided to make no recommendation because it doesn't have a direct financial effect. It has an effect on who controls the creation of positions and titles and all the rest of that, but that didn't seem to be in our wheelhouse. So I'm just saying that, as far as this is going, it ended up on our hearing agenda, but when we came to making our recommendations, we just passed.
All right, well, why don't we then, for the new set of public hearings that we're going to do, why don't we reassign that article, Carmen?
If I might just suggest, I would, I'm not, who is the sponsor of this article? It is the Personnel Board. Okay. I would urge the Personnel Board to really think seriously about postponing this one because I see no urgency in it. It doesn't need to happen immediately. And there is going to be a lot of discussion about this proposal. And for the same reasons you've noted about, for example, neonicotinoids, where Mike, that there's likely to be a lot of discussion if farmers are going to have a point of view, et cetera. In the absence of a real urgency to make this change, I can see us spending a good half hour, 45 minutes on this one at town meeting.
All right.
Mike, can I just comment on that?
Of course.
I worked closely with the personnel board on this. And actually, in context, I remember Susan saying that she was on the personnel board some number of years ago, and at her first meeting, they talked about doing this bylaw change, but from my perspective, I would categorize this as non-essential for the purposes of this meeting, and I would encourage the personnel board to agree to a postponement as well. There really is not, and I mean, we've been operating under the current system for many years. There's not a real urgency to change it.
Well, if you would please do that then and just get back to us, and we will deal with that when we get the finance committee and the select board together. That'd be great.
So the other one I think that might, either we have a dual hearing change or just get it on our hearings, would be the TIF. If we're going through another round of hearings, the TIF wasn't really in our hearings list, and the finance committee has a lot of concern and opinion about
The
that.
select board article.
I know it's a select board article. You can have it on your, I guess we should just attend your hearing or something, but it's a financial, it has significant financial
Yes, I know.
impacts on the
I would expect
community.
your committee to have a point of view about it. So,
Yeah. Okay.
May I point out, Mike, that there certainly have been instances in the past where the finance committee and the select board have jointly held a hearing on a particular article, which is clearly in the wheelhouse of both the board and the committee.
Sure, I'm sure. Well, Dean and I will get together and figure that out. We've got to get together, I think, anyway, with somebody from the town manager's office, maybe Chris, to get a schedule put together for these new set of public hearings. And,
Yes.
I guess, Dean, you and I better get our heads together with Chris and get that done relatively in short order. All right, Terry?
I have a question about the petition articles. When we're doing these hearings, will the petitioner present and will there be opportunity for robust discussion from other citizens? And can we get a good airing of them the way we're doing all the other articles?
They were presented at the public hearings that we had, and there was good discussion about all of the articles then. I don't know why we would expect it to be different this time. I think what is going to be different is that when we set these things up, we're going to remind all of the presenters that the presentation they make not only are going to be recorded as part of our public hearing activities, but then I'm going to ask the town manager to work with me and Minuteman Media Network to then go in and get those presentations squared away and have them posted so that we can notify all of the residents in town that the presentation that we're not going to see at town meeting can be seen through Minuteman Media Network, so that we have, even though an abbreviated presentation of a minute or so, whatever the moderator is going to allow at the town meeting, we could have a fuller presentation of the article from our public hearing. So I think that's really essential. All right.
We are already anticipating that, so yes.
Yeah. All right. So thank you all very much for not only attending, but all of your input. It's greatly appreciated. I will get a revised list of warrant articles together, and then Dean, I'll give you a call, or we'll figure out how to get together and figure out when we can have this joint finance select board meeting. And we'll get that posted as soon as we can. And we'll also work on the schedule.
We'll figure it out quickly, because we've got to run through this with hearings, and we got a ways to go to get to this town meeting.
I know.
It's going to be exciting.
So, all right. Does anybody else have a final comment, Carmen?
Yeah, I just want to add that I think that the our tradition has been for the finance committee and the select board and the planning board, any committee that is going to vote on a recommendation to make to town meeting on any particular article doesn't do that until after the hearings are done. But I'd urge you to think about whether that's necessary on in this circumstance, whether it's necessary for you to wait until after the second set of hearings, when there's already been one set of hearings, to formulate your recommendation. If you formulate a preliminary recommendation, it's certainly open to you to change that recommendation after the second round of hearings, but I am worried, as I know Dean is, about how all of this work is going to get fit into a calendar schedule for everybody, and how the recommendations and all of the materials that we want are going to be ready in time to be printed and distributed at annual town meeting, because we've got a bunch of lead time we've got to back up on those.
To that point, we have been kind of marching through our recommendation cycle. We pounded through many that ended up on your consent calendar, Carmen. So we've already, kind of taken those and taken care of them. We do have a list that we have sort of been sidling up to, but we've been delaying because we're just trying to wait until there's some level of finalization on the the main operating budgets, and that has knock-on effects for some of the other elements. So, we're down to a very short list at this point of what's left in front of us, frankly. But some of those will take some time. Yeah. Yes, Mary.
Mary?
I have a quick question. In the past, if there was a high interest article, the Finance Committee would be given time at town meeting to articulate our recommendation one way or the other. And I'm assuming that this year that won't happen. So how will, is that a safe assumption? Or how, I guess the question is, how will the Select Board or the Finance Committee have its recommendations heard during or before town meeting, the actual town meeting?
So I would say they can be printed and included in the materials. It just means that, once again, you're going to have to be ready a little sooner, because normally you don't have to be ready until the floor of town meeting to make your statement. But this time around, if you want a fuller explanation, I mean, we always print in the Finance Committee report the FinCom and the Select Board's recommendations on the articles, thumbs up, thumbs down. But if you want a fuller explanation, that would go not in the Finance Committee report, but it would go in the materials that we're going to print and distribute at the meeting. We would, we can. I'll take your guidance on how you would like to do that. We can put the recommendation behind the materials for each article, so it's the thing that you see. You're gonna, when you turn to that article, you're gonna see the motion and you're gonna see the recommendations. And maybe there'll be a recap of the presentation that's in there on paper for people. That seems to me to be probably the best way to organize it. Although if it's easier for the committees and the boards, you can put all your recommendations together and we'll put them in a section.
Okay,
So,
but it's hard copy at the meeting, not presentations and not.
I think also the other thing for both for the Select Board, the Planning Board, the Finance Committee, any of our standing committees that routinely take positions on warrant articles, I would advertise you're going to do that, so that when you get to a particular article in a Finance Committee meeting, the public is alerted. We've somehow alerted the public to the fact that you're going to hear what the Finance Committee thinks at their meeting on July, whatever it is. The Select Board is going to start taking articles up, I had announced, on the 20th. But I think I'm going to change my mind and begin taking articles up on next Monday's meeting on the 13th. I think I'll try to deal with the articles that are all on the consent calendar and see if we can get through all of those at our meeting on the 13th, and then pick up the articles that would need a little bit more discussion at subsequent meetings, and hold off on the budget meetings until the budget situation has gained a little clarity. All right, Diane, you're muted.
You're still muted.
Sorry.
You're still muted.
I'm
Now
there.
you're
We go. Sorry. Hi, I'm sorry. When will the dates for when the public hearings are going to occur be available? for
As soon as
people
we
to
figure
sign up?
out when they are.
Okay, I mean, but do you presume those going to be in August at some point?
Well, I would suspect so.
Okay, so there was a mention that it might be toward the end. Is there, I'm sorry not to know this, but is there a date by which they have to occur before the town meeting?
There is some requirement for the planning board, is there not, Carmen?
Within 6 months.
Oh, just within 6 months.
That's for
And
the
we have
plan.
already had a hearing.
Right, I know. Ray do. Okay,
Sounds
thank
like-
you.
Sounds like we've got that one covered.
Thank you for that information. I'm sorry not to know.
Not a problem. Are there any additional comments? All
Yes,
right,
Tanya.
One last thing, that those recommendations, Mary, also I should add that if they're as soon as they're ready, we'll also post them on the website under the town meeting tab, because what we typically do is we have a separate page for every article that's on the warrant, so that people can click on it and see materials under it. And so those recommendations can be put there as well, as
Great.
soon as they're ready.
Thank you.
all right. Well, I greatly appreciate you all joining us this morning.
Are you
and,
taking public comments, or it says on the agenda?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I want to express, this is Tanya Galis, 62 Prescott Road. I want to express our deep gratitude to all of you, and also to the town moderator, especially for using language that recognizes all the articles, both citizen articles and those presented by boards, of being as being equal standing. So, I just wanted to make that comment, express my appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Any other comments? All right, everybody have a good day, and thank you again very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.